I know that some of this dropped out because he had an issue with the chip in the camera. So I might just do a real quick recap of that just for the people on YouTube so that they know. Let's see. Yeah, okay, so in 104, for example, it says, they said to Jesus, come, let us pray today and let us fast. And Jesus said, what is the sin that I have committed, or wherein have I been defeated? But when the bridegroom leaves the bridal chamber, then let them fast and pray. And again, in understanding things on the heavenly level and the earthly level, you always have to just look for both meanings. What is the earthly meaning? What is the heavenly meaning? You know, what is the higher level, in other words? Well, there's the physical fast and there is the spiritual fast, right? What you eat physically, you eat donuts, you eat, whatever. That's physical eating. And so if you were to refrain from physically eating, we call that a fast. But there's other usages of the term. And if you read the Shepherd of Hermas, for example, they talk about fasting as being like something where you would not eat so that the food that you did not eat you would give to someone else, right? That's one sentiment. But the spiritual food that we eat, for example, is the scriptures. And the idea here is that so long as the bridegroom is in the bridal chamber, which is to say in communion with your heart, your mind, your soul, your spirit, that's the true bridal chamber where you and the Godhead meet, is in your heart. Right? When that leaves, all of a sudden you're subjected to separation or division, like we just talked about. The idea is that with the logos no longer in your heart, your mind, your thoughts, whatever, then you suffer that separation. And so when he leaves your heart, your soul, your mind, whatever, at such a time, that is the fasting, if you will. That is the separation whereby you need prayer, right? Because you need that rest restored to you, right? So this points to a time when the Logos is not known, and it's a spiritual fast in that sense. The next one, Jesus said, he who knows the father and the mother will be called the son of a harlot. And we went over about how we read in Jeremiah, for example, it speaks about Babylon. In the book of Revelation and the book of Jeremiah, it speaks, in Revelation in particular says that Babylon is the mother of all harlots, right? So we have to look for a biblical meaning in order to get at what he means by the harlot. Because it's easy to say that people called Mary that because she didn't have the father and she wasn't married, and so that was a slanderous accusation that was often laid and still is by some people. But I don't believe he's talking about that. He talks about his earthly mother and his heavenly mother or whatever. But what I think he's talking about is that we're going to be given over to Babylon. We're going to be given over, and in the spirit anyway, in the church sense, over to Jezebel. And that at some point we will come out of her. Like it says in there, come out of her, my people. So I believe that the people who come out of the harlot, if you will, are the people who are led by the Spirit and born again into a new spirit, wherein the bridegroom re-enters the bridal chamber, let's say, and you're born again, perhaps a second time, if you will. He says, when you make the two one, you will become the sons of man, and when you say mountain, move away, it will move away. Again, there is the mountain of God and there's the mountain of men. When things are built up, let's say, on the earth or whatever, it means that it's sort of an earthly empire. A high place on the earth, for example, is a kingdom. You have mountains, you have hills, and you see this a lot in the scriptures where that particular metaphor is used, but it has to do with high places. And if you make the two one, what are the two? The two are the heavenly and the earthly, right? The heavenly meaning and the earthly meaning. When you recognize that the heavenly is couched in the earthly, and that the earthly and the heavenly are inherently the same language, it's just two ways of looking at the same thing. So when you make those two things one, in other words, when you understand the upper as well as the lower, and you recognize that the upper is inherent in the lower, and therefore can be extracted from the lower and thus restored in time.
A greater illumination.
So then you can say to the earthly kingdom to move away, because it gives you the power to transcend just that lower thing and replace it with the higher thing, because you recognize that the two things are actually one thing. That, you know, the heavenly is couched in the earthen vessels, let's say, as the canon puts it. And then we went over the and again, I'm going over this because it got cut out of the last one, so I'll just make real quick work of that. The kingdom is like a shepherd who had 100 sheep. One of them, the largest, went astray. He left the 99 sheep and looked for that one until he found it. And when he had gone through so much trouble, he said to the sheep, "I care for you more than the 99." I mentioned how this is brought up in the gospel of truth, where it says that when the one is found, that's symbolic of the right hand, and that the 99 is symbolic of the left hand. Again, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. So the one obviously is the one with the knowledge, and the 99 are the ones who don't know what the right hand or the knowledge is, according to the interpretation provided for us by the gospel of truth. But also a couple of references to Logians 96 and 98 on that for basically two fundamental things. You notice that he uses the term the largest here.
Yes, sir.
Right?
Right.
The largest went astray, right?
Right.
So that one is larger than the 99, right? So there's your hint, right? If you go to the Gospel of Thomas 8, for example,
Yes, sir.
and you look at that, it says the man is like a wise fisherman who cast his net into the sea and drew it up from the sea full of small fish, right?
Yes.
Right? And among them the wise fisherman, again the wisdom, right, found a fine large fish, right? So you have the large versus the small, the many versus the few, right? And he threw all the small fish back, right? So if the sheep is larger by comparison, the fish is larger by comparison, the small fish are smaller by comparison, the 99 sheep, were smaller by comparison. In other words, you see the same thing, it's just a different form.
Yes.
He threw the small fish back into the sea and chose the large fish without difficulty. Why is it? Because, well, again, when he says the large sheep, he says it's the fine large sheep, right? So it's the right one, right? So you can assume that when he says fish, it's kind of the same idea. He shows it without difficulty. And again, he tells you it's a parable by saying, whoever has ears to hear, let him hear. Because, again, it's not your earthly ears or your earthly ear alone, but you hear it with your heavenly ear as well. So that's why it's plural. Right, so that's making the two one when you understand the heavenly and the earthly. And then there's another parallel in that one too. When you go to Logian 96, there's another example to just kind of round it out. It says the kingdom of the Father is like a certain woman took a little leaven and concealed it in some dough and then made it into large loaves. Let him who has ears hear. Again, it's a parable. Loaves are the food, the bread of God, the word that we eat, in other words. The fact that they're large kind of insinuates that they're fine, like the fine, large, the fish, or the.
I think that when you remember with biblical symbolism, most of the time, but not all, leaven or yeast is a symbol of sin, right?
Right.
Beware of the yeast, the leaven of the scribes and Pharisees, which is hypocrisy.
Mhm.
A little leaven leavens a whole lot. But then Jesus does say the kingdom of heaven is like a little leaven, because it's like I said, most of the time it's a negative symbol. Well, take the lion, right?
The function of it.
Right.
Jesus is the lion of the tribe of Judah, but then the devil's like a lion seeking he may devour.
Right.
Yes,
People
so-
see the context.
So yes, the context is most of the time leaven represents sin or iniquity, but not all the time. Sometimes it's the concept of the mustard seed, right? The mustard seed is
Yes.
little, and it produces a big
Yes, the way that it
tree.
grows and festers.
Right.
So if you
Yes.
let one little bit in, it's going to
So-
swallow the whole.
It's the
But
teaching.
but a little leaven can make a big loaf.
Yes, sir.
I think in that way, he's saying, it takes a little faith to move the mountains.
Yeah.
But like I said, 9 times out of 10, leaven's a bad symbol. Not always.
Well, because
Yes,
that's
yes,
how
yes.
because that's how sin takes over your life. You let in a little bit, and then all of a sudden it's taking you over.
But also another thing, if you have a mustard seed of faith, you can
You
use
can grow
mountains.
it, yeah.
Jonathan's got a.
Lawrence Lessinger wrote a book on the Jewish way of raising children. We read it when Lucas was an infant, and it was an amazing help to us. I highly recommend the book. But one thing that she pointed out, she said, that thing about your child that just drives you crazy? That one thing that just drives you up wall, you know what it is, every parent knows what it is. That one thing, develop that. That's their greatest strength.
Wow.
Oh.
And I think that's similar to what Stephen's saying, and I think that's what Scripture is trying to teach us in using things like leaven and the lion.
Right.
Is that the very things that the devil is using in our character to draw us into sin are the passions that can be turned back around and be our most powerful assets for God.
Two-edged sword.
Amen.
It is a
Right.
two-edged sword.
Like, this reminds me of Martin Luther, right? You look at him, and he had a lot of admirable, to confront the corruption in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
But sometimes that was negative.
Yes.
Because Erasmus of Rotterdam was a brother in the Lord. He just said the most hateful and vile things against Erasmus. And then when he started off, he was pro-Jewish, but I think what happened is he got into a debate with a rabbi, and this rabbi was blasphemous and insulting.
Well,
And then he just goes, oh,
they'll
starts.
see,
Wrote
they'll
off the
see
race.
Kabbalah, they'll see Jewish mysticism, they'll see that, and they'll say, oh, I don't like Judaism, what they've done to.
Well, yeah, but he's a hothead. Martin Luther was a hothead. So
And he
that-
ran
But
the
that
wrong
was
way with
also
that.
his two-edged sword. It was
That's
his
what- that's-
strength
yeah,
as
that's what-
well.
Hothead was his
That-
strength,
that's
exactly.
good.
That's why
That's
he
what
was
I'm saying.
willing to nail this thesis, because he was a hothead. He wouldn't have done that if he wasn't a
I'd
hothead.
like to say real
You would
quick,
have thought about it, yeah.
Right?
that
What
mustard
will,
seed,
what will your mother say? What will your
a
friends
mustard
say?
seed has more faith in God than most men do, because it relies on everything it gets from God.
I guess that's
If we had
true.
faith like that, then we too would grow that.
Well, I think what it points to is that you have to be faithful in little things,
Yep.
right? And if you're faithful in little things, then you will be given large things, right?
with the gold.
That's why we talk about the book of Jude so much, because people tend to blow little verses, blow them off if they seem like they're small, or they blow off little books like Obadiah or Jude or other books, because they automatically look at them as small and insignificant. So you would think that if everything were, if there was a point to be proven in everything, that there'd be a point to be proven in looking at the small things. And how they say the devil's in the details. Well, sometimes the truth is in the details, and you have to look at the little things as you're doing it. And that kind of leads us into 108, where he says, he will drink from my mouth will become like me. I myself shall become he, and the things that are hidden will be revealed to him. So a couple of things. There is the hidden and there is the manifest. We talked about that separation again before, where you have like the two versus the one. If you are completely and totally at the mercy of the teachings of the church and their traditions, or even Judaism and their traditions, right? The leaven, if you will, the teachings, if you will, of the Pharisees, where they expound on this and they expound on that and kind of blow it up. But they blow it up in terms of human reasoning and human understanding and human traditions and that kind of thing. And so that leavens the lump in a certain direction, right? But if you understand the mysteries, which is what he's getting at, if you drink from my mouth, and again, to understand this verse, you kind of have to look at Logian 13, and I'll just read the extracted part of that. When Thomas says to the master to compare me to, or when Jesus says to the disciples, he says, compare me to someone and tell me who I'm like. And Simon Peter says, you're like a righteous angel. Matthew says, you're like a wise philosopher. Thomas says, my mouth is holy and capable of saying whom you're like. And then he says, well, I'm not your master. Because you have drunk, you have become intoxicated from the bubbling spring which I have measured out. So drank from, right? He drank from, right? What is the bubbling spring, in other words? His words, his teachings, right? The word that comes out of his mouth, right? So that's why if you drink from my mouth, you will become like me, right? Which kind of helps you to understand why he went and took him at that point and told him three things, right? I believe that what he told him was that there's going to be three dispensations. There is the Old Testament, the New Testament, and there's going to be one further. And you read this in Revelation, where the sword comes out of his mouth at his return.
Right.
Again, from his mouth.
Right.
If you drink from my mouth, the sword from my mouth. You see, at his return. See what I'm saying? And so the idea is that if he comes back to his companions and they ask him, what did he say to you? And he says, well, if I tell you one of them, right, then you're going to pick up stones, which again, you see the connection between stones and bread. You can't eat a stone, but you can eat bread, right? He says, well, who if, some of the connections would be like, well, who, if their son were to ask him for a bread, would give him a stone, right? Or else, at the temptation, can you make these stones turn into bread then, right? You see what I'm saying? Where you see this connection between stones and bread. Because what you eat with a stony heart, you see what I'm saying, versus what you eat with the heart of flesh, right? You see what I'm saying? If you're eating the word, that would be the difference, would be your understanding of it. And your understanding of it would be tempered by the fact that, do you know his words, right? Do you know his mysteries? Are the hidden things open to you? So apparently Thomas couldn't express it because the mysteries were open to him, because he had drunk from the bubbling spring which he had measured forth, which is parallel to this, whoever drinks from my mouth will become like me. I myself shall become he, and the hidden things will be revealed to him. And the reason why you can say that, we are often spoken of as his members. If we do according to his will, then we become his hands and his feet. If we speak according to his will, we become the mouthpiece for him. You see what I'm saying? If we understand according to his understanding, we essentially become his eyes and his ears and his hands and his feet and his mouth on this earth in order to bring about his plan. Right? So this is what I feel like he means when he says, I myself will become this person, because when the truth is revealed to you, see, there's no difference. If he's speaking the truth and you're hearing it and you're speaking that truth, it's as if you're speaking with his words and you're speaking with you're thinking with his mind. You have the mind of Christ, and so you, in a sense, become him.
One thing I was thinking about is you have this, it's one of the problems with gender neutral, woke, news. 1984 Orwellian newspeak. They try to, the term "son of man," oh, that's sexist, but that's the name of this cosmological Messiah. I think it's interesting where it says, where was that? When you make the two into one, you'll become the sons of men, right? You will become. He's the son of man. We can become like little sons of man, right? We're supposed to be like, well, Jesus. Of course, this translation they're trying to.
He even says in the canon, though, that we shall do greater things than he, because he went to the Father, right? So you think about what he did. He brought a testament, did he not? He brought the teaching, right? So all of those things he's given us to do, right? See what I'm saying?
Eternal present.
But this time it'll stick. That's the difference, because the previous time there was a falling away, right? But then in the millennium, we're going to rule for 1,000 years as kings and priests, right? Yes. So in a sense, he's given it to us that we might accomplish greater things, because that was his doing and his will, his words, his plan, all of that. And all we've done is stumbled upon it, which essentially leads into the next logion. Really, if you think about it that way, it's a treasure that's hidden. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so it says the kingdom of is like a man who had a hidden treasure in his field without knowing it. After he died, he left it to his son, and the son did not know about the treasure. He inherited the field and sold it. The one who bought it went plowing and found the treasure, and he began to lend money and interest to whomever he wished. And there's a little bit to unpack here, but if the idea is that when you see on the road to Emmaus, for example, Yeshua is explaining to those men, hey, listen, and he starts explaining what the Son of Man had to suffer, right, out of the law and the prophets and the Psalms and all that, right? And their hearts were burning within them, right? Because, but their eyes were being held, right? That's likened to this age, let's say, where he's walking with you, you're going from point A to point B, so there is the passage of time, and, symbolic of that, he's explaining to them, right, what was hidden, what was to be, what I'm saying, he's explaining, did it not behoove the Son of Man to suffer these things, right? Because these things were written about him, in other words, right? So that was a treasure that was hidden. So that's like part one, right? And then part two is that Yeshua himself gave prophecies for his own coming and for the other time, right? And the Christians basically did despite to that as well, because those mysteries were lost, because you can see that if they're found, that means that they were lost, right? So the idea is that if you're able to discover this treasure, right, that you're that third generation, in other words. So he's basically saying that Jews dropped the ball and the Christians dropped the ball, right? But the third one, the one who went plowing, right? Well, why does he go plowing, right? Because again, we talked about the plow earlier too. But the idea is that the earth is the earthly teaching, the earthly level. If you go plowing there, right? If you go looking, right? If you seek, you knock, whatever, but you put your effort into it, you work, right? Then you're going to be able to uncover this treasure, right? And you read in, let me see, where's the verse? Just a few verses back, where he says, If you have money, do not lend it at interest.
Right.
Let me see. But give it to someone from whom you will not get it back.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, here it is, 95. So it says, if you have money, do not lend it at interest. And he's speaking to his current group, right? The people who were there. So who do they represent? Those are the people to whom the mysteries of Yeshua were given,
Yes.
right? So the money is the wealth, right? Because money is always the knowledge, the wealth, the mystery, and poverty is always not knowing that. The fleshly level versus the heavenly level. And he says, do not lend it at interest, but give it to the one from whom you will not give it back.
Right.
So they were the ones who buried it. You see? Because they weren't supposed to lend it at interest, but who did? Right? The guy in verse 109 did. So he was the third in line. See, the man had a treasure in his field, right? In the earthly, in other words, the heavenly was couched in the earthly, but he didn't know it. And after he died, in other words, so he lost the mystery, because whoever comes to find the meaning of this interpretation will not taste of death. Therefore, ergo, if you do find the meaning, then you found life, right? But they lost the meaning. See, that's why the word death is used here. And he left it to his son. That would be the Christians. They didn't know about it. They were ignorant about it. So they died, right? So they inherited the field and sold it, right? Again, buyers and sellers will not enter the kingdom of my Father, right? So he says, and the one who bought it, right, went plowing, in other words, dug into the dirt, uncovered the earthly meaning, and found the treasure, which is the higher level meaning, right?
Right.
That, again, that goes back to the previous verse. All the things that are hidden will be revealed to him, right? He who will drink from my mouth will become like me. And I'm saying you see the relationship here. And then he began to lend money and interest to whomever he pleased. So there's no contradiction. It just means that when he said don't lend money, it was to the second group. It was to the early Christians, right?
Right.
And then the person who went buying, or who bought the field and went plowing was the third in sequence, right? And so they began to lend money at interest to whomever they pleased. Because why? Because we are owed a great and tremendous debt by the church and by Judaism, essentially. Not us in particular, but this generation, right? Because they will be the ones to uncover the mystery, and they will have been in the wrong all along. And so they owe God a debt. You see what I'm saying? And so this is where you get all of these themes of where, like, whoever has money, renounce it. Whoever has power, renounce it. You see what I'm saying? And let him who has found the truth or whatever, let him reign. You see what I'm saying? There's a switch in power. There's a switch in the power structure. So the third person is allowed to lend money at interest because that's his function. And again, that leads into the next one we just talked about. Whoever finds the world and becomes rich, let him renounce the world. Why? Because he's able to say, listen, I found this wealth. You know, here's all this poverty that you gave us, right?
Right.
You know, I found the truth here, and here's all your falsehood, right?
That's right.
I'm going to renounce that falsehood. I'm going to renounce that error. I'm going to renounce that death. I'm going to renounce this generation. I'm going to renounce this age, right?
Yes.
And then he says, okay, in 111, the heavens and the earth will be rolled up in your presence, and the one who lives from the living one will not see death. Again, because again, the contrast between the dead and the alive, right? Whoever comes to understand the words of this saying will not taste of death.
Amen.
And then these are the words that the living Jesus spoke, right? Which Didymus Thomas wrote down, right?
Exactly.
So the living is the higher level, and the dead is the lower level,
Right.
right? So, and he says, and just rhetorically, does not Jesus say, whoever finds himself, is he not superior to the world? Right? The idea is that the world is giving you all this falsehood, all this earth, in other words, and you go plowing and you find the treasure that's hidden, right? Not only have you become rich, but you've been given power over this world, right? Let him renounce the world, right? Does not Jesus say, whoever finds himself? So he's relating those two statements, obviously. He says, woe to the flesh that depends on the soul, and woe to the soul that depends on the flesh. And that harkens back to what we discussed earlier in 87, where it says, wretched is the body that depends on the body, and wretched is the soul that depends on these two. So there's three things at play, right? The body, and the soul. And the idea, again, you know how he says, like, let the dead bury their own dead, right?
Yes.
Burying has to do with earthly things, earthly teachings, right? The first body of dead believers was mainstream Judaism, the Judaism taught by the scribes and Pharisees, and all the people came before them. Maybe all the people came after them by extension. And then the second dead were those who basically formed themselves in the imitation of Judaism. In other words, they took the ideas of the canon, they took the ideas of the priesthood, they took the ideas of the top-down structure of things, they took the ideas of the large volumes of teachings by men, you know, and the codification of things and everything, and and exchanged the truth of the simplicity of the gospel for the complexity of the teachings of men. So this is the body, the dead body, who basically buried, you know, or with whom the second body was dependent, because Christianity is to a very large extent in the image of Judaism and in the patterns and the traditions of Judaism. And the third person in this equation, if they're dependent on those teachings, then their soul is wretched, right? So that relates to 112 again, where it says, woe to the flesh that depends on the soul, woe to the soul that depends on the flesh. The idea is that the flesh is the lower level meaning, and the spirit is the higher level meaning. So if you subject the spiritual to the fleshly, that means you're wretched. And then just one more, and that should do it. And I had to treat 114 just by itself, but this one's pretty self-obvious. It says, when will the kingdom come? He says, it will not come by waiting for it. It will not be a matter of saying, here it is or there it is. But rather, the kingdom of the Father is spread out upon the earth, and men do not see it. So in other words, the heavenly level is couched in the earthly meanings. So it's spread out before you in terms of earthly understanding, and people don't see it. So when you see it, you understand the truth of that statement. It's sort of self-evident at that point.